Have you ever found yourself gazing at your divine masculine and quietly asking, "What was I ever drawn to?" Perhaps you felt a sudden wave of repulsion or numbness toward the very soul you once believed was your mirror. If this resonates, you are not falling out of love, you are awakening. This shift is not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. What you're experiencing is the collapse of illusion, not the connection itself. At Spiritual Universe, we understand how disorienting this moment can be, because it marks the sacred threshold where fantasy dissolves and truth begins to emerge. In today's video, we at Spiritual Universe will guide you through one of the most misunderstood yet pivotal phases of the twin flame journey, the moment when emotional detachment begins to rise. We will help you recognize that what may feel like rejection is actually remembrance. Together, we will explore why your soul is no longer magnetized to an outdated version of your counterpart, and how this shift is a powerful act of self-reclamation. This is not the end of love, it is love evolving into wisdom, clarity, and coherence. By watching this video, you will gain clarity, comfort, and confirmation. You will begin to see this phase not as a loss, but as a return to your inner alignment. We will walk beside you as you release the fantasy and return to the frequency of truth. This transmission is designed to support your sacred detachment, to help you understand why your nervous system is saying no more, and to empower you to choose yourself not in fear, but in sovereignty. This is how you rise. This is how you call back your energy and restore your spiritual integrity. We invite you to stay with us through the entirety of this message. Sit with the discomfort. Let it speak. Let it soften. Let it transform you. If you are ready to see your journey through new eyes, free of illusion, rooted in self-honor, then allow this video to be your mirror. Watch until the end, and when you feel that shift within, comment below with the affirmation, "I choose coherence over illusion." Let this be your sacred signal to the universe. You are ready to receive love that meets you in truth. Number 1. Awakening from the fantasy, the sacred disillusionment. There comes a moment on the twin flame path, subtle yet seismic, when the very love that once pulled you in like a magnetic force now begins to feel different. Heaviness replaces longing. Distance grows in place of desire, and for many divine feminines, this shift is profoundly confusing. You may ask yourself, am I falling out of love? Or, why does the connection feel repulsive, numb, or even wrong? But what you're experiencing is not the death of love, it is the birth of truth. It is the sacred disillusionment, the moment your soul gently begins to reject illusion. This shift is not a sign of failure. It is not the collapse of your divine connection. Rather, it is the collapse of the fantasy that cloaked it. And this fantasy, as beautiful as it once felt, was never rooted in lies. It was born from longing, from the deep, ancient ache to feel whole again, to reunite with a love you remember not from this earth, but from the higher realms where separation never existed. The illusion wasn't evil, it was sacred. It was part of the soul's journey to remember itself through contrast. But now, your higher self is asking something more of you. It is asking you to face the gap between the soul memory of divine union and the actual choices your masculine is making in the 3D. It's asking you to see not with romantic eyes, but with spiritual discernment, the difference between who he was in the higher realms and who he is now in this incarnation. And this moment can feel like heartbreak, but it is actually a breakthrough. The divine feminine begins to understand that she wasn't truly loving the man standing before her. She was loving his potential. She was pouring endless unconditional love, not into the reality of his presence, but into the vision of who he could become. Her devotion wasn't misplaced, it was misdirected. It was aimed at the soul version of him, not the human reality he was choosing to embody. And so, a shift occurs. The love that once poured outward in rivers begins to turn inward. Her energy, once focused on holding space for another, begins returning home to herself. And let it be clear, this is not abandonment. This is not bitterness. This is alignment. For the first time, the divine feminine is choosing herself not from ego, but from sovereignty. Not from fear, but from truth. This is the moment she stops clinging to potential and starts honoring presence. She stops chasing the idea of union and starts anchoring into her own wholeness. The veil falls. the fog lifts, and standing in that clarity is a woman who is no longer defined by waiting, hoping, or sacrificing. She now chooses clarity over confusion, sovereignty over self-denial, and truth over fantasy. This sacred disillusionment is not the end of your twin flame journey. It is the recalibration of it. It is the purification of love. And through it, a new version of you is being born. One who does not shrink for love, but expands in her own light. One who does not beg to be chosen, but chooses herself fully. This is the spiritual rebirth the fantasy was preparing you for all along. So if you're feeling lost, disoriented, or even heartbroken in this phase, know that you are not breaking, you are blooming. What you're shedding is not love. It's the illusion that love needed to look a certain way. And what's emerging is the truth that love has always been you. Number 2, the threshold of sacred disgust, a soul's rebellion against self-abandonment. There comes a turning point on the divine feminine's journey that is often misunderstood, feared, or dismissed, a moment that feels strange, even repulsive. What once magnetized her heart now triggers discomfort in her body. She may feel a visceral wave of nausea, a tightening in her chest, or a sudden desire to withdraw from the very person she once yearned for. But this is not chaos, it is clarity. What feels like disgust is not dysfunction, it is divine intelligence guiding her home. This sacred discomfort is not a collapse of the connection, but the activation of her sovereignty. It is the soul saying, enough. Enough of cycles that left her empty. Enough of sacrificing herself for the illusion of love. Enough of the energetic bankruptcy that comes from overgiving without reciprocity. Her body, wiser than words, rebels, first contracting where she once expanded, repelling what she once chased. This, beloved one, is an initiation. At this threshold, something extraordinary begins. Boundaries rise not from bitterness, but from wisdom. The divine feminine starts to feel an uncompromising need for space, silence, and sacred solitude. She is no longer willing to grant emotional access to someone who hasn't met themselves, someone who hasn't done the inner work to hold her depth. And this isn't about punishing the masculine. It's about honoring herself. Where she once bent to be understood, she now stands in quiet knowing. Where she once shrank to keep peace, she now expands into her full light. She no longer performs the role of the emotionally available one in a dynamic rooted in avoidance. Her energy no longer flows toward proving her worth. Instead, it anchors into the truth. She is already enough. The grief that surfaces during this awakening is real. But it's not grief over losing him. It's grief over the parts of herself she abandoned in the name of love. It's the mourning of a version of her who tolerated emotional starvation and called it loyalty, who accepted breadcrumbs and wrapped them in devotion. And now in the stillness, her soul whispers a new truth. You deserve more. This moment is not disconnection. It is reconnection with the self, with the sacred feminine essence, with divine truth. She doesn't need to explain, convince, or chase anymore. Her no becomes a prayer. Her silence becomes medicine. Her boundaries become the altar where her wholeness is remembered. This is the soul's rebellion, not against love, but against self-abandonment, a holy revolt that rewrites her story. She is no longer the one who waits. She is the one who remembers. And in that remembering, she rises not above love, but into a version of love that honors her spirit, nourishes her body, and respects her boundaries. This is not the end. It is the becoming. As you sit with this sacred truth, we invite you to pause and reflect. Have you felt this shift, the subtle yet undeniable call to reclaim yourself from the patterns that once drained your soul? This isn't just a personal moment. It's a collective awakening for so many divine feminines across the planet. If this resonates with your journey, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs right now. Or simply type, "I honor my sacred disgust and reclaim my truth." Let this be your declaration, a signal to the universe that you are no longer available for anything less than what honors your soul. Number 3, the collapse of the pedestal, from illusion to inner authority. There comes a sacred moment in the twin flame journey when the divine feminine begins to see truly, see the man she once placed upon a pedestal. The image of him that once glowed with magnetic idealism begins to fracture, not with hatred, not with bitterness, but with clarity. This is not betrayal. This is evolution. It is the moment her spirit whispers, "Look again, not at who he could be, but who he consistently chooses to be." This awareness does not come with fanfare. It often arrives quietly, in the spaces where hope used to live, in the silences that she once romanticized as mystery, and in the repeated karmic loops that she used to interpret as destiny. Where once she excused emotional unavailability as depth, she now sees avoidance. Where once she called inconsistency spiritual testing, she now recognizes immaturity. Her eyes begin to adjust to the light of truth. Her heart does not harden, it refines. Her love does not disappear, it becomes wiser. Depedestalization is not the death of love. It is the rebirth of discernment. It is not an act of rejection, but a radical act of inner self-respect. She begins to understand that true love does not require the sacrifice of her own truth. That being twin flames does not require her to endure unconsciousness, neglect, or delay. She begins to rewrite the narrative that told her to suffer quietly in the name of spiritual growth. The pedestal was never about him. It was about the parts of her that longed to believe in his potential, in the fantasy, in the reunion that would heal all wounds. She wasn't just seeing him as a savior, she was projecting her own forgotten divinity outward, hoping he would mirror it back. And so, as the pedestal collapses, so too does the illusion that her worth depends on his awakening. Now, she steps off the altar she once built for him, an altar made of longing, hope, and silent prayers, and reclaims the throne that was always hers. She no longer kneels before the fantasy. She rises in her own sacred authority. Her crown is not made of his approval, it is forged in the fire of her own self-remembrance. This shift is not about bitterness, it is about boundaries. It is not about ego, it is about energy. She begins to walk alongside reality, not illusion. With each step, she lets go of the version of him that lives only in potential, and meets herself as she truly is, whole, sovereign, and spiritually awake. This is not the end of her love story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one where she chooses herself not as a defense, but as a declaration. And from that place, everything begins to change. Number 4. The nervous system says no more, a sacred rebellion of the body. There comes a moment on the sacred path, especially for the divine feminine, when the body can no longer lie. After years of enduring, of holding space, of pouring unconditional love into a well that never seemed to fill, something within her shifts. But it's not a breakdown, it's not despair, it's clarity. This moment isn't loud or dramatic. It begins subtly, perhaps with a sudden tiredness that cannot be explained, a quiet disinterest in the things she used to chase, or a physical repulsion to dynamics that once felt magnetic. The body begins to whisper and then scream, no more, not another day of spiritualizing neglect, not another minute of calling aching devotion. The nervous system, long overridden by hope, by belief, by projection, finally asserts itself. And when it does, the truth is undeniable. This is not failure. This is evolution. This is the body finally catching up to what the soul has known for some time. She is no longer content with crumbs that once felt like a feast. The subtle gaslighting of her intuition, the way she once confused emotional absence for spiritual mystery, is no longer sustainable. She can no longer make herself small in the name of love. Her sacred system refuses to carry what her spirit has already outgrown. This is the sacred ick, the visceral energetic recoil that happens when her body recognizes something her mind hasn't yet fully accepted. She has been betraying herself in the name of loyalty, and now her entire being is saying stop. She may feel sudden waves of disgust, not because she's broken, but because she's finally waking up. This disgust is not an insult to her love, it's the signal that she's no longer abandoning herself in the process of loving another. She is not shutting down, she is waking up. The version of her that spiritualized suffering, that labeled longing as loyalty, that interpreted silence as sacred connection, that version is dissolving. She no longer romanticizes her own depletion. She sees with new eyes, not just spiritually, but somatically. Her body, her cells, her breath, all affirm what her heart now whispers with conviction. This is the end of the illusion. In this sacred rebellion of the body, she reclaims something profound: sovereignty. She stops asking the divine for signs that tell her to stay. She no longer needs confirmation that her love is valid. It always was. But now, she honors the deepest truth of all, that love does not require the abandonment of self. This is what it means to say yes to herself, to no longer bypass her physical wisdom in favor of fantasy, to stand in the fire of her awakening and let the old stories burn. Her nervous system is no longer a battlefield. It is her compass. It points her home, not to someone else, but to herself. And from this place of embodied truth, she walks forward, not in bitterness, but in deep reverence for the lesson, for the body, and for the soul that finally aligned with both. If you've made it this far, it means something deep within you is stirring. Perhaps your own body has whispered no more, or maybe you've recently felt that sacred ick rising from places you once silenced. This is your confirmation. You are not broken. You are awakening. We invite you now to pause and reflect. What part of your nervous system has been trying to speak? What illusions are you ready to release? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice might be the very light someone else needs. And if you're not ready to share in full, simply affirm with us by typing, "I trust my body. I honor my truth." Let this be your declaration to the universe and to yourself that your healing has already begun. Number 5, the sacred fire of discernment. When love evolves into wisdom, there comes a sacred moment on the divine feminine's path, when the fire within her does not erupt in rage, but ignites with unmistakable clarity. It is not anger that fuels her detachment, but wisdom born from deep soul-seeing. She no longer pulls away to punish, manipulate, or provoke a response. She withdraws with quiet grace, not to create distance, but to protect her peace. This is the soft power of awakened discernment, and it is nothing short of holy. In the past, she may have explained herself endlessly, hoping her words would be understood. She may have chased, pleaded, bent herself backwards to meet him halfway, hoping love would be enough to wake him. But now, something within her shifts. She recognizes the sacred patterns that life reveals, truths that speak louder than empty promises. And in that recognition, she stops negotiating with potential. She stops carrying the burden of someone else's delayed awakening. She sees clearly now. She sees the chasm between the vast beauty of his soul potential and the reality of who he currently chooses to be. And instead of throwing herself into that gap to bridge it, she pauses. She steps back. Not because she's bitter, but because she's wise. She no longer assumes the role of the healer, the fixer, or the redeemer. She chooses to no longer suffer in the name of love. With a quiet whisper that carries lifetimes of clarity, she says, "I can love you deeply and still not want this current version of you. It is not cold. It is not cruel. It is truth." And in that truth, she reclaims her light. The illusion crumbles. The projection she once cast upon him, the dream of who he could become, dissolves into the fire. But this fire is not destructive. It is alchemical. It refines her. It purifies her love. And what emerges is not heartbreak, but power. Her love is no longer bound to outcome. It does not demand change. It does not wait in suspended time for someone to finally arrive. She is no longer frozen in hope. She is lit with knowing. In this sacred fire, she discovers something extraordinary. She does not need him to change in order to be at peace. She does not need him to awaken for her to feel whole. She is done waiting for words, for apologies, for timelines to align. Her love remains, but her tolerance no longer does. This is what spiritual discernment looks like, not a turning away from love, but an elevation of it. She loves without attachment. She sees without illusion. She walks without fear, and that is what makes her sacred. Because discernment is not the end of love. It is the beginning of wisdom. Number 6, the Preunion Threshold, where love stops reaching and starts receiving. There comes a moment on the sacred twin flame path that is often misunderstood. To the outside world, and sometimes even to the feminine herself, it may look like detachment, like giving up, like silence, where there once was devotion. But what appears to be an ending is, in truth, a profound beginning. It is the sacred threshold of preunion, a soul recalibration where love shifts from pursuit to presence, from reaching to receiving. She no longer clings to the echo of who he was. She no longer worships the ghost of a man built from memory, potential, and longing. Instead, her eyes adjust to what is. She sees him clearly, soberly, fully as he stands now, not as he once was or who he might become someday. And from this clarity, a different kind of love emerges. Not the love that chases or bends, but the love that centers, grounds, and magnetizes. The divine feminine steps into stillness, and this stillness is power. She no longer floods the connection with overgiving or emotional labor. Her energy stops leaking through unreciprocated effort. She no longer pours herself into proving, fixing, or awakening him. Instead, she returns to her own sacred sanctuary, the deep well of wisdom within her, and from this space, she draws a clear line. I meet you in truth, or not at all. This is not a threat. It is not a test. It is a frequency. And this frequency changes everything. The masculine feels the shift not just in behavior, but in energy. The absence of her life force creates a silence he cannot ignore. For so long, he was fed by her presence, her forgiveness, her unwavering belief in him. But now, her light no longer spills into his shadows, and in that space, a choice must be made. The polarity has been activated. He must rise, not because she begs, but because his soul can no longer tolerate the gap between who he is and who he is meant to become. And whether he chooses to meet her in that truth or remains in resistance, the outcome no longer defines her, because now she chooses from sovereignty, not survival. She no longer loves from fear of loss, but from alignment with her highest self. She is no longer holding space for the version of him who refuses to hold space for himself. In this sacred threshold, she becomes the magnet, the still center, the axis around which new timelines begin to spin. This is not weakness. This is the divine feminine in her most refined form. She has nothing to prove and nothing to chase. She has arrived at the place where love is no longer something to reach for, but something she is. And from that embodied truth, union becomes inevitable, whether with him or with someone who meets her frequency, because she is no longer available for anything less. Imagine a woman who once sent long, heartfelt messages to her twin flame, explaining her love, her pain, her hopes. She waited by her phone, hoping for a reply that never came, convincing herself that his silence was spiritual, that his distance was divine timing. Every day, she showed up with more compassion, more understanding, carrying the weight of the connection on her own shoulders. But one morning, something shifted, not with anger, not with finality, but with quiet truth. She opened her eyes, looked at the thread of unanswered messages, and felt no need to send another. Not because she didn't love him, but because she loved herself more. She didn't block him. She didn't lash out. She simply stopped reaching. She closed her eyes, breathed into her heart, and whispered, "If you are meant for me, you will find me in truth." In that sacred moment, she reclaimed her center. Her energy returned to her body like water returning to its source. She no longer chased his potential. She sat in her peace. Days later, he felt it. Something had changed. The energetic pull he once took for granted was gone, and for the first time, he was left with only himself, his choices, and the space she used to fill. This, beloved, is the moment of preunion, a quiet revolution of the soul, a shift that turns longing into sovereignty, not a goodbye but a sacred invitation. Meet me in wholeness or not at all. Number 7. The neutrality that sets you free, choosing peace over projection. There comes a moment in the sacred unfolding of the divine feminine's journey when what follows is not rage, nor grief erupting outward, but something much quieter, much deeper. It is neutrality. But do not mistake this neutrality for numbness, detachment, or apathy. This is the holy ground where true liberation begins. It is the space between reaction and rebirth, where the feminine finally gives herself permission to feel everything, not just the ache, not just the sorrow, but the stillness in the center of it all. In this space, she no longer gaslights herself. She no longer questions her intuition or tries to twist her truth into a narrative that makes someone else more comfortable. She no longer tells herself that things aren't that bad or that love requires sacrifice. Instead, she allows herself to sit in the raw, unfiltered truth of what has unfolded. And that truth is this: what she is mourning is not the man himself, but the fantasy, the vision of him she once held so tightly, the dream of what they could have been if only he had chosen to rise. This grieving is sacred. It is not weakness. It is the unraveling of projection, the dissolving of illusion. With quiet reverence, she begins calling back all the energy she once scattered in the name of hope, all the love she gave trying to hold him together, all the light she poured into someone who refused to meet her in the same frequency. She is no longer available to the version of him who refuses to meet himself. And still there is no bitterness. She closes the door not in anger, but in deep self-respect. This is not the slamming of a door in rage. This is the soft, steady turning of a key in the lock, with a heart that knows its own worth. She does not wish him harm. Her love, surprisingly, remains, but without the hook of attachment. The energy is no longer chasing. It is no longer waiting. It is no longer hoping he'll return as the man she once saw in her visions. That version of him must choose his own healing now. If he rises, he will meet her in coherence. If not, he will fade into the background of her story, no longer the center of her world. Either way, she is free. And in that freedom, something miraculous happens. She remembers who she is. She reclaims her essence. She no longer confuses love with longing or spiritual connection with emotional compromise. She walks forward not with anger, but with clarity, not with resentment, but with sovereignty. This is not indifference. This is preservation. This is the sacred neutrality that sets her soul ablaze with truth. She is no longer waiting at the edge of someone else's becoming. She has become the woman she was always meant to be. There comes a sacred turning point on the twin flame journey, a moment so profound that it shakes the very foundation of what you once believed love to be. What once felt like magnetic soul recognition may now feel like energetic misalignment, and though it may confuse the mind, your soul understands. This is not madness. This is not failure. This is remembrance. Your higher self is whispering, "I see who you are, but I choose me." The divine feminine's growth is not measured by how long she waits, how deeply she suffers, or how much she holds space for another's avoidance. Her evolution is measured by how courageously she chooses coherence over confusion, truth over illusion, peace over potential. It is not the absence of love, but the birth of self-honoring. She still loves, but she no longer abandons herself to do so. This is not apathy. This is sacred preservation. A love that no longer sacrifices clarity is a love that has matured. And this, dear soul, is your moment of return. Not return to him, but return to your truth. Let the ache awaken you. Let the disillusionment be your sacred teacher. Let your nervous system be your compass. And let your peace be the new altar upon which you stand. You are not walking away, you are walking home. To the truth that your love was never meant to be a waiting room. It was meant to be a mirror. And if that mirror no longer reflects your wholeness, you are not betraying love by releasing it. You are honoring its final lesson. Comment below with the affirmation, "I choose coherence over illusion." Let this be your signal to the universe that you are ready for a love that meets you fully, that reflects your radiance, that speaks the same frequency as your soul. If this message stirred something in you, like this video, share it with a soul sister or brother who needs this clarity, and subscribe for more sacred insights on the twin flame path. Your union doesn't begin when they return. It begins the moment you choose yourself. And when you're ready to go deeper, watch the next video waiting below. There's more to discover on this path of liberation, truth, and divine alignment. Your soul already knows the way.